The Committee on House Administration will come to order. The title of today's hearing is Why the Wait? Unpacking California's Untimely Election Process. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. Also, without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 legislative days, so members may submit any material they wish to be included therein. Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli, members of the committee, and our witnesses for participating in today's hearing. Today, the Committee on House Administration will continue its oversight of federal election policies. The chairman of the committee, it's a top priority of mine to improve federal election law and increase transparency for American voters. During the 2024 election cycle, 155 million Americans across the country cast their ballot in the elections for president, Senate, House of Representatives, in state and local elections as well. Over 16 million of those votes were cast in the state of California. Most Americans watched election results being announced on election night. That wasn't the case in California. According to the Associated Press, it wasn't until December 4, nearly a month later, that all of the California races were ultimately called. The longer it takes to provide the results of an election, the more voters can lose trust and become frustrated with the process. Today, we'll examine the reasons for California's delay in reporting results. A major cause of the delay in California election results is the state's universal mail system, which is prone to delays, tabulation, and ultimately the calling of races. The ability to vote by mail in California has been available in the state since 1982, and state lawmakers have continuously expanded the bounds of mail-in voting ever since. In 2022, the California legislature codified pandemic-era procedural laws and enacted universal vote by mail for every election administered by the state. In other words, every registered voter in California gets a mail-in ballot. This not only opens the door for potential fraud, but it also causes delays on the counting side. Another issue we'll explore today includes accepting ballots after Election Day. Currently, California accepts ballots delivered up to 7 days after Election Day. We'll discuss with our witnesses if that means it needs to be postmarked, what happens if it's not postmarked, what happens if it's dated, not dated by the candidate, but California accepts ballots collected up to 7 days after Election Day. This matters because on Election Day, California doesn't know how many ballots will be cast, and so results for close elections can't be announced in a timely manner. Makes no mistake, it's California's own state policies that are creating these significant delays in election reporting. While other states are taking steps to implement positive change, California spent 50 years moving in the other direction. For example, in a state like Florida with a population of 23 million, Florida is able to report election results on election night. Following the 2000 election, of course, Florida took a serious look at its own election policies and passed a law to ensure ballots are actually counted on and by election night. California's system also doesn't really increase voter participation. Timely election results, I believe, builds voter confidence and can increase voter turnout. In Florida, voter turnout was 78.9% of registered voters, so a record high. California's participation in the 24 election was 71.4% of registered voters. Florida requires absentee ballots to be delivered to the election to local election offices by the close of polls on Election Day. In Florida, absentee voters may cure ballot discrepancies within 2 days after the elections. In California, voters have up to 28 days to cure absentee ballots. 28 days. It's a long time, something we can be discussing with our witnesses as well. In November, 3 days after the election, I traveled to Los Angeles County's Central Count and got to witness the tabulating process in Los Angeles County firsthand. When I arrived 3 days after the election, LA Central Count still had 900,000 outstanding ballots that needed to be tabulated. And that's in LA County alone. That's not the state of California. 900,000 total just in LA County. It was an amazing experience to walk through the LA Central Count, and I think we have an opportunity to talk with our witnesses about the reforms that could be made. This is uniquely important because the balance in the United States House of Representatives at that time still had not been determined, in large part because the races in California weren't called due to the lax election laws that are resulting in these delays. The rest of the country shouldn't have to wait on California to know the results of the elections. We're looking at California particularly today because they have continued to move the goalposts in their election policies. California's election administration highlights why Congress must conduct oversight of states' federal elections and determine whether it might be necessary to enforce baseline standards on election integrity. So I thank our witnesses for being here today. We're going to have a great conversation about what's going right and what's going wrong in elections across the country, but in particular, what's going wrong in the state of California. And I thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to our discussion. I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Morelli, for 5 minutes for the purposes of providing his opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Stile, for calling us together, and certainly thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I appreciate any effort to improve electoral processes in California or, frankly, anywhere else in America. But I do want to be clear about one indisputable fact. There is no evidence that California's recent elections featured any irregularities or fraud. California's elections were legal and legitimate. How do we know? Because in November of 2024, Republicans deployed election observers to more than half a dozen congressional districts across California. These observers monitored ballot tabulation and processing operations in California. They reported no instances of illegality or any serious election-related irregularities. What they reported was California election officials following the law. And to be crystal clear, Republicans did not contest the outcome of a single congressional race in California under the Federal Contested Elections Act. To anyone watching this, please understand there is a long-standing mechanism for challenging congressional results that were improperly decided, and Republicans did not challenge any congressional result in California. There is no question the ballots counted in California in the period after Election Day were legally cast by eligible American voters. That is undisputed. So this hearing is not about making American elections more secure. We're holding the hearing because my colleagues simply dislike the way Californians voted. It's not the procedure Republicans actually have a problem with, it's the outcome. Now, there are always ways in every election in America that we could make them more efficient. And I'm sure there's probably room in California for improvement in their elections to speed up the process. So standardizing notice deadlines and ballot cure review across California, these policies could probably streamline elections. We could be working in a bipartisan way to enhance election efficiency in California and elsewhere. Instead, we seek to make elections less efficient. My colleagues push policies that increase burdens on election administrators, policies that take a sledgehammer to free, fair, and secure American elections. The SAVE Act, for example, which was passed over our objections a couple weeks ago, allows any person to sue any election official based solely on mere suspicion that a non-citizen is registered to vote. How quickly will any state process ballots of election officials are besieged by endless, frivolous lawsuits? And the President's already deemed illegal anti-voting executive order could lead to the decertification of thousands of voting machines used across the United States. This deeply harmful executive order would cost states billions of dollars. It would fundamentally disrupt American elections. And both the SAVE Act and the executive order would eradicate voter registration by mail or online. This would wreak havoc on election administrations nationwide and disenfranchise millions of military and overseas voters who rely on mail and online voter registration to exercise their sacred, inalienable right to vote. Some proposed Republican policies would harm American elections so much even prior Republican witnesses at this committee caution against them. We've heard Republican witnesses warn of the inefficiency of processing hand-marked, hand-counted ballots, which have been advocated by members of the House Republican caucus. Forget about weeks to resolve elections. It would take months or years to have election results. Committee Democrats called a witness today to give voice to the military and overseas voters that would be harmed by Republican election policies. But the record should reflect that our colleagues blocked Democrats' initial witness choice, a military spouse stationed overseas named Sarah Strader, from appearing today. Sarah wanted to speak to this committee about how we can better serve military and overseas voters, but because she is nearing the third trimester of her pregnancy, transatlantic travel presented a significant barrier for her attendance here. The majority denied our request for her to testify remotely, something we have the technology to facilitate. So, because Sarah is a pregnant military spouse with travel limitations, she was not allowed to testify. It is not lost on us that if the SAVE Act were law, Sarah would also be unable to register to vote today because it requires in-person voter registration, so women stationed overseas with pregnancy-related travel limitations would be barred from registering to vote. Today, the majority will attack completely legitimate elections in California. That's the idea here. Meanwhile, President Trump and congressional Republicans advance policies to create massive barriers to military voting. We have not held a single hearing on military and overseas voting, and the Votes Act, championed by Congress members Frost and Lee, who's a member here of this committee, would increase military voter access, unlike the SAVE Act. Why are we discussing this today instead of that? We would happily waive this committee's notice requirements to call the Votes Act up right now to send it once again to the full House. So to defend rather than undermine legitimate American elections. Instead of wasting time, can we support military and overseas voters? I would hope we would, and thank you. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made part of the record if they are submitted to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Today we have a one-witness panel. First we have Ms. Ashley Titus, who is a partner at Bell McAndrews in Hilltack. Next we have Mr. Austin Gilbert, who's co-owner of Right Choice Strategies. After that, we have the Honorable Donald Palmer, Chairman of the Election Assistance Commission. And finally, we have Rebecca Nowacek from the Secure Families Initiative. We appreciate all of you traveling to be with us here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses, we've read your statements and they'll appear in full in the record. I'll now recognize Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I am an attorney in private practice in Sacramento. My first election as an attorney for a campaign was March 2004, and it took 2 weeks after that election for the nominee to be known. For well over 20 years, California's canvass has been slow. But now there are more close contests that take 3 to 4 weeks after the election to determine the winner. California's election laws impose numerous procedures that extend ballot processing and counting far beyond election night. Election administrators must contend with constantly changing rules and manage a larger volume of complicated mail-in provisional ballots in a 1-month period following each election. The original culprit behind California's lengthy canvass is no excuse access to mail ballots. In 1978, California became the first state to allow voters to apply to vote by mail on an election-by-election basis without a reason. Since the 2020 general election, every active voter receives a ballot in the mail without applying. In the most recent general election, nearly 81% of California's 22.5 million registered voters cast a mail ballot. Hand-delivered and drop-box ballots must be received by the close of polls on Election Day, but mailed ballots are valid if they are received by an election official by the 7th day after the election. About half of mail ballots cast are dropped off by voters on Election Day and are not processed until days or weeks after election night. When a mail ballot is received by an election office, the laborious signature comparison process begins. Some counties in California use technology to conduct the first signature comparison, while others solely rely on election workers. Before a signature on an envelope is deemed not to compare to the voter's signature on file, 3 levels of review must find beyond a reasonable doubt that the signature on the mail ballot envelope possesses multiple, significant, and obvious differing characteristics when compared to all signatures in the voter's registration record. When a signature is challenged, the voter has an opportunity to provide a substitute signature. If a voter returns their mail ballot envelope without a signature, that voter also has an opportunity to provide a signature. In both cases, this process is known as signature curing. Depending on the county, a voter may submit a substitute signature as late as 28 days after Election Day. Many signature cures are returned as a result of the harvesting efforts of campaigns in close contests. Usually, county elections officials are permitted to certify their election results as soon as they have completed all of the required tasks. But a law temporarily in effect for the 2024 general election prohibited counties from certifying earlier than the 28th day after the election. The response of many county elections officials was to suspend canvass activities outside of normal working hours to avoid paying overtime to their canvass workers. thus further delaying the reporting of results for the November 2024 general election. In addition to the nearly 60-day mail voting process that we have in California, California's same-day voter registration significantly contributes to the delay in finalizing election results. This is known as conditional voter registration, and California permits individuals who are not registered to vote by the 15th day before an election to complete a registration affidavit and cast a ballot. Conditional registrations are a type of provisional ballot, which take the most time and the most labor to process. It is the cumulative effect of all of these procedures and deadlines that cause the delay in finalizing California's election results. Of the weeks it takes to know the outcome of close contests, California's Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, said Californians should be patient. But not all of California's policymakers agree that we should just accept this. There are several proposals currently pending in the California legislature to address the lengthy canvass. One bill would require all counties to offer in-person voting on the Saturday prior to Election Day. But given that 78% of voters already have this option, and still over 80% of California's voters returned a mail ballot in the most recent election using an envelope, this is not likely to ease the post-election crunch. Several members of the California legislature have introduced bills this session to simply mandate speeding things up. But these proposals would impose an arbitrary deadline by which certain ballots must be counted or that the canvass must be completed without addressing the root causes of the current lengthy process and without equipping elections officials with the means to process ballot envelopes faster. The solutions must focus on mail ballot and same-day voter registration procedures and deadlines. Otherwise, California will continue to be last in the nation to finalize its election results. That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gilbert, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Austin Gilbert. I'm a campaign field operative and consultant, and I've run numerous campaigns over the last decade in the Central Valley and High Sierras in California. I've dealt with elections offices and officials during counting procedures, ballot curing operations, and recounts across 13 different counties, and I've been a resident of Fresno County my entire life. California elections can be described in one word: slow. Over the last decade, California has prioritized voter access over efficiency, effectiveness, and safety, inundating elections officials with time-consuming verification and sorting processes, security flaws, and a reliance on mail for voting. With the passage of the Voters' Choice Act in 2016, California changed from traditional in-person voting to the new method of vote centers, drop boxes, and mail-in voting. This process was designed to be slow from the beginning. To start, state law mandates that any election official accept and count ballots postmarked on or before Election Day and received within 7 days of the election. This immediately slows results from being disclosed to the public, as elections offices don't even receive an accurate count of the total votes cast until most of the nation has finished counting. The centralization of this election process, from precincts to vote centers and the elections office, has also complicated the ballot sorting process. Specifically within Fresno County, we typically deal with upwards of 300 to 500 different ballot types, that being any ballot with different contests included on it. While in years past, you would vote at a precinct of your neighbors, and there were a very limited numbers of unique ballot types, now vote centers are required to provide every single unique ballot, as any voter can vote at any vote center. You can imagine it's a lot easier to sort 2 to 3 different ballot types in one location than between 500 and one centralized vote center. California also has an extremely arduous signature verification process, one that relies heavily on human interaction and the interpretation of handwriting. While most states verify identity before voters receive a ballot, California sends ballots out to every voter and verifies the signature after the fact. This process of signature verification usually works in 3 steps. Ballots are received in the elections office and scanned for a signature. The signature is compared to the voter's signature on file, and the ballot is either accepted and opened or denied. At this point of denial, a ballot cure form will then be sent to the voter so they have a chance to correct their missing or non-matching signature. While in theory this sounds simple, in practice it becomes the most complicated process in administering an election. In the days following an election, you can often see thousands of ballots in one room at different stages of the verification process. This includes ballots that have yet to be verified, ballots that are waiting on cure forms, ballots that have been accepted and are being separated from the envelope, provisional ballots awaiting verification, and conditional voter registration forms. All of this before elections officials can even flatten, sort, and count to provide results to the public. There are also multiple deliveries of ballot types to the elections office on election night. This comes from ballot boxes across the county, vote centers, and United States Postal Service. All of these added steps and processes revolve around the signature verification process, which is largely done by temporary workers and election employees inside of a single county warehouse. It's important to compare this to the original process, where voters would sign next to their name in a precinct, it would be verified, and that voter crossed off the list from their specific precinct, and then a ballot would be issued. Now, rather than just sorting ballots, the elections office is single-handedly tasked with the entirety of verification, sorting, and counting. California also does not maintain clean voter rolls. In many counties across the state, voters are tasked with updating their own elections office on changes to their registration, including if a relative dies or no longer lives in the state. In many instances, households would receive ballots for members of their family that were recently deceased or no longer live there. While that is a massive security concern, it also adds to the extremely high cost of administering elections. In virtually every elections office, you can ask to see their undeliverable ballots, which usually surpass the thousands. These ballots are ones that USPS couldn't verify an address for or were returned to the elections office for any number of reasons. With the price of paper, printing, and postage, you can imagine this amounts to a massive cost. Complicated verification processes, ballots still being received up to a week after election night, the ability of voters to cure ballots 28 days after an election, and messy voter rolls have led to one of the slowest and most costly election processes in the nation. The prioritization of voter access has led to a lack of speed, security, and a diminishing trust in California elections over the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Donald Palmer, Chairman of the Election Assistance Commission, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Stout, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear for you to address post-election procedures. At the EAC, we offer year-round help to election officials to improve the administration of elections. This ensures that eligible Americans can participate in a secure electoral process and have confidence in the final results. Prior to the 2024 election, I visited 4 of California's largest election offices to discuss their challenges, meet their senior staff, and thank them for their public service. It should be noted that American elections are highly decentralized, with different states prioritizing different policies concerning ballot return, counting, and finalizing results. Today, I hope to provide insight into why it takes longer to count ballots in California than in many other states. In prior years, the California legislature has made several policy choices that have contributed to the extended curing and ballot counting timeline. I also note that California legislators have recently proposed several measures that would streamline the post-election process. As an all-ballot mail state, California gives voters 28 days after Election Day to cure signature discrepancies on mail ballots. In contrast, for example, Arizona gives voters 5 business days, and Colorado voters have 8 days to cure mail-in ballots. In addition to the extended cure period, under California election law, ballots may be received up to 7 days after the election. In contrast, 33 states require that mail ballots be received by Election Day. When provided the opportunity to drop a mail ballot off on Election Day, voters inevitably do so, thus pushing the necessary canvassing and verification of mail ballots deeper into the pre-certification period. With the omission or mismatch of signatures of mail-in ballots, the curing period also extends the time of the final tabulation of results. Individual state laws play a fundamental role in our elections. Some of the factors involved in a different pace in tabulating and final certified results include the extent and timing of absentee or mail ballots and early voting, pre-processing opportunities and tabulation reporting requirements, resources and personnel available to election officials, deadlines to return absentee or mail-in ballots to voters, and curing or provisional ballot rules. So before joining the EAC, I've served as a director of elections in Florida from 2008 to 2011. In Florida, county supervisors of elections must finalize their results within 13 days following the election. During this time, election officials offer voters a curing process, which includes signature resolution and the opportunity to correct incomplete ballot certificates. The timeline in Florida offers a streamlined and efficient vote tabulation process that balances the need for accuracy and promptness. However, it took the state of Florida several years and election cycles of trial and error to find the correct procedures to maintain efficiency, report promptly, and increase voter confidence. As charged by the Help America Vote Act of 2002, the EAC fulfills its role as a national clearinghouse for information on election administration in many ways. The EAC regularly provides detailed best practices, templates, and webinars related to mail ballots, the canvassing process, post-election activities, and ballot curing. The EAC has highlighted jurisdictions using new technology to allow voters to promptly cure ballots. These resources promote consistency and legal compliance, ensuring that every lawful vote is counted and the electoral process is secure, reliable, and timely. In addition, the 2024 Election Administration Voting Survey, or EVES, will be delivered to Congress by June 30th. It contains questions on state ballot curing. This enhanced data collection will better enable the EAC to show ballot curing trends across the United States and provide baselines to inform future state laws and administrative improvements. I would also like to touch on the role of the United States Postal Service in ballot delivery and its failure to deliver timely ballots. The EAC will continue to work with the USPS and the states to build that relationship and to improve mail balloting across the country. Through adequate funding of the EAC, the Commission will continue to provide crucial support and policy recommendations to states and localities across the country. Thank you for your continued investment in the EAC and your unwavering commitment to election administrators, poll workers, and our nation's public servants. We look forward to collaborating closely with you on these and other essential matters. I would be pleased to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Palmer. Ms. Nowacek, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to speak today, specifically on this topic of election administration in California. My name is Rebecca Nowacek. I am the Director of External Partnerships at Secure Families Initiative. We are a nonpartisan organization that strengthens the voices of diverse military families as an active and influential constituency on issues that impact our lives. We also lead the Military Vote Coalition, a nonpartisan coalition of over 20 military family and veteran support organizations united by our mission to protect the military community's access to the ballot box. SFI's military voter education programs have also been recognized nationally and highlighted as key information source for active duty families by the Department of Defense. I'm here today representing my community and SFI, but not to advocate for any partisan outcome, but to ensure that the community we represent is at the table where our access to the ballot box is being discussed. Personally, my firsthand knowledge, both as a military spouse and also as the daughter of a combat veteran, has led me to this work. Military families represent America. Military families come from rural areas, small and large towns and cities. They include members from every ethnic group, religion, educational background, and sexual orientation. Nearly 50% of service members are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. Over 50% are under 30 years old, and 92% of military spouses are women. The military community is a network of families stationed all over the world. Most active duty families move every 2 to 3 years. These moves can disrupt support networks, safety, children's education and social lives, and limit career paths. These moves also impact our ability to vote. Routine mail delivery delays is a common challenge entirely out of our hands when stationed far away from home. For example, families stationed all the way in Japan have shared experiences of mail taking 6 to 8 weeks. And there are other challenges that I've highlighted in my written testimony. So it should be no surprise that military voters are 27% less likely to have voted than their civilian counterparts. When a military voter tries to vote but is unsuccessful, the most common reason is because their ballot arrives past the deadline. The second most common reason comes when a military voter's ballot gets rejected for something like a missing signature or a date, and the voter isn't notified or provided the opportunity to cure the ballot by the deadline. That's why we have long advocated for policies that would tackle these top issues facing our community. Best practices include, number one, enable ballots that are postmarked by Election Day to arrive at least 7 days after Election Day to still be counted, and two, ensure timely ballot rejection notification and robust ballot curing processes and opportunities for our voters. Both these policies are true for California, home to the largest number of active duty members in the United States, and also one of the largest uniform and overseas citizen, or UACAVA, voting populations. These policies may lead to longer wait times, true, for election results, But more importantly, they go a long way to protect military voters who should have the same opportunity as our civilian counterparts to be maximally deliberative about our choices at the ballot box. There are two proposed federal policy changes currently in motion. One, the SAVE Act, which this chamber advanced earlier this month, and the March 25th executive order regarding voter registration requirements. Both take American elections in the opposite direction, where military voters need them to go. For instance, one of the barriers of the SAVE Act may impose would require voters to bring passports or birth certificates in person to their election office when they register. This means military families would no longer be able to register from that faraway duty station, and if a person has changed their last name since birth, for example, if you're like me and changed my last name when I married my husband, using a birth certificate might not be sufficient documentation on itself. If implemented, the March 25th executive order would also undermine the ability for military families to access the ballot box. The order would mean that the military families stationed halfway across the world from home, who crossed every T, who dotted every I when casting their ballot, their military ID would no longer suffice, and mail delays outside of their control could mean their ballot could never count. So in closing, I'd like to remind the committee that voting carries a profound, profound gravity for us. The right to vote is a cornerstone of the democracy that we as military families have committed to protect. I urge this committee, as well as every other body in Congress, don't abandon us, don't abandon military families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions. Out of the gates, without objection, I'd like to insert the written testimony of Cole Peterson, the data director for the California Republican Party, without objection. Ms. Titus, I want to start with you, in particular kind of dialoguing the 7 days the ballots can be received by California after Election Day. You would think that it would have to be postmarked, right? I mean, the idea is that it's in the USPS system. What's the check on that in California? Do they review for postmark? What happens if it's not postmarked? Could you provide some color to that?
They do, in fact, review for postmarks, and they do reject mail ballots that either don't have a postmark or don't have a date. California doesn't require that the voter date their ballot when they sign it, but there is a space to do so. And if they are dated on or before Election Day but lack a postmark, then those would be counted.
So let's just dialogue this all the way through, because when I was at LA Central Count, I found this really interesting, because I watched ballots arrive by mail into the system 3 days after, as I noted, about 900,000 total ballots were somewhere in the process of being counted, of being validated, observed. The signature verification, we'll come to that second. But is your testimony that if USPS doesn't date the envelope and an individual then opens the ballot, the voter's not required to date the ballot in California under California law, but if they do date the ballot and they date it by Election Day, it would still count? Is that accurate?
Yes.
So the real check isn't that it was in, it's a trust system that the individual who dated the ballot dated it on the correct day, right?
Correct.
And so if somebody dated it by Election Day, USPS didn't stamp that with a postal date stamp, it would count?
Yes.
And that USPS doesn't date 100% of their mail.
Correct.
Yeah, so it sounds like a problem. And the way to fix this, of course, would just be to require that it's collected in by Election Day. I went to high school, I think a lot of us did, and when a paper was due, when did we write the paper? When it was due. And so if you just say it has to be in by Election Day, it shifts that. And Chairman Palmer, you noted 33 states require that ballots be in by Election Day. I'm assuming that means 17 plus maybe the District of Columbia allow them to come in after Election Day. Is that accurate?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
And is there a significant correlation with voter participation if it needs to be in by Election Day or after Election Day?
I don't think that there's a direct correlation.
Right, it's just people are going to do it by the deadline, right? So if you say you got to have it postmarked, you got to have it in by Election Day, you get a ton of people that drop it in the box by Election Day. If you say it's got to be received by Election Day, a lot of people drop it in sufficiently in advance or drop it in person so that at least the physical ballots are all in by a specific deadline, right?
I agree, sir.
And so if I'll come back to you, Ms. Titus. So California runs a system also where every registered voter receives a ballot, regardless of whether or not they requested it. It's automatically sent. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And so when that goes out, obviously not 100% of the people that receive a ballot participate in the election, but a large percentage, I think it was about 70 or so percent in the state of California. But for the purpose of calling election, not only do you need to know the numerator, how many ballots come in, and they can come in up to 7 days after the election, but you also need to know the denominator, which is how many total people are voting when I apologize, the denominator in the context of what percent you would need to be able to win an election. So for 7 days, everybody in California is reasonably blind as the total number of ballots cast in an election. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And that makes it really hard to call a race, to know who won an election, right?
Yes.
And so that challenge, I think, is a real and substantive challenge. I want to end with the signature comparison. When I walked through LA Central Count, it was burned into my mind watching this woman do the signature verification. What standard or what training are the workers given who are engaged in the signature verification in California?
There is no standardized training.
So there's no training.
There's no standardized training.
Okay.
Some counties have more rigorous training, some counties have very little. What I've also seen is the comparison process is often occurring on a computer screen, and they may be comparing 4 different voter ballots at the same time. So they will have the scans of the outside of envelope.
And the standard so the training varies.
Training varies.
The woman that I met said she had almost no training.
And there's about 17 criteria they're supposed to apply when
And the standard that they have to meet is beyond a reasonable doubt?
Correct.
It's a pretty high standard.
Yes.
Especially in a situation where these live ballots are mailed to every registered voter. I think we've identified some of the challenges we see in California. Appreciate our witnesses here. Cognizant of the time, I'll now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to ask the witnesses, can you raise your hand if you have information or knowledge that demonstrates that California election officials wrongly certified a winner in this year's California congressional elections? Okay, the record should reflect that none of the witnesses raised their hand. I do want to ask Ms. Nowacek, I'm sorry if I'm probably killing your last name, I apologize. If it were easy like Morelli, I would get it, but your testimony discusses how vitally important it is to our democracy, the right to vote particularly for military and overseas voters. To your knowledge, the voter access and election administration policies in place in states like California, and I will say in my state of New York, which also allows ballots postmarked to be counted up to a week after Election Day. Do these policies enhance the ability of military and overseas voters to cast a free, fair, and secure ballot?
Yes, so our position is we need to take into account the experiences that our families are experiencing. And for those stationed overseas or even in the continental United States, when trying to access the polls, we will experience mail delays. And so any policy that takes that into account, like the state of California being able to count ballots 7 days after the election, makes it easier for our community to participate, absolutely.
You mentioned in your testimony, and I don't know this, I didn't have this experience, but I think you indicated the number of days typically that mail delays can occur. Let me just, I thought there was a number in here, but can you just tell me a little bit, you've had this experience of the amount of time that it takes just for U.S. mail to get back and forth from wherever you happen to be. Obviously, it depends on where you are, but if you're in the Pacific, can you talk a little bit about those delays which you've experienced?
So priority mail for international for USPS is about 6 to 10 days. Others average about 7 to 14 days. So from our position, 2 weeks is very friendly to the military voter, but we recommend 7 days as the gold standard.
Yeah, and so the process is, if you're on a base, can you just talk about that? I actually don't know how or if you're, let me say this, if you're on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific, how do you get
Well, I
mail
personally
gets
have never
delivered?
been on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific.
Well, it's someone in your organization
But
probably
yes,
has.
we do have members with that experience. I can share when it doesn't go well. So we have a member who was stationed, because we do have people who are stationed, families who are stationed on installations that aren't U.S. military installations. So in military installation connecting the United States, we have access to our mail system. But for example, we have one member who was stationed on a Canadian military installation, so therefore she did not have access to U.S. mail, and actually ended up having to pay a private courier to then courier her ballot back to make the deadline. Extremely expensive, and we know the majority in our community do not have those financial resources to do that. And I share this story for two reasons. One, to hit home really what the mail delay situation and those barriers can be for us, but also really to express how many people in our community desperately want to participate in this process and are really looking for policymakers to make it as accessible as possible for us to do so.
Thank you for that answer, and I guess you're right, you're a spouse of, so you wouldn't, that makes sense. It's Tuesday, I apologize, I'm not really fully functioning yet. The other thing that you mentioned, which I hadn't really given thought to, but I guess makes a great deal of sense, is that you may be on a military base, but you may be in a host country,
Correct.
and you have to make that connection somehow.
Correct.
And so I appreciate your comments about that. I would say this, and I appreciate all the witnesses and your perspective. And I just, from my perspective, getting this right is maybe more important than getting it fast. And like I said in my opening statement, I'm certainly willing to look at, and obviously with the Elections Assistance Commission, we could all look at ways to improve this and make this faster for everyone to some degree. But we also want to respect the notion that California and other states want to get it right. They want to afford every single voter in their state the opportunity to vote. And look, it shouldn't be a gotcha. I mean, the right to vote should be inalienable. It is, according to our founders, inalienable rights that we have. And so the fact that California takes time to get it right, and I suspect from the fact that there were no contested elections that they actually did get it right. So I don't want to value speed over doing this properly and getting it right. So anyway, I thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The representative from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. First, let me say that I represent the great state of Oklahoma, and prior to being elected to Congress, I was in the state Senate where I oversaw the state election commission. Shout out to Paul Xerox, Secretary of the Election Board there. Oklahoma, I think, is doing elections right. We have voter ID laws in place and have had them based on a state question that was put forward to the voters a couple of decades ago. And that ensures that a couple of things. One, that the election is verified and there's integrity in that process. And also speed. And my colleague, the ranking member, just talked about speed. I've now participated in several elections in the state legislature and now as a member of Congress, and I know on election night whether or not I am going to serve in that capacity. I think it is unbelievable to hear that it takes a month for the state of California to be able to certify these elections. That in itself provides uncertainty in the process, and I think that's what's really problematic here. I want to mention earlier the comments that the ranking member made in regards to the Votes Act. No matter a service member's status, and no matter if you're in the service or not, each state has procedures for all eligible overseas Americans to vote, and those options always require or include mail. But let me be clear, if there are examples of overseas voters being denied by a state, we want to hear about that because we certainly want to make sure that we're addressing that issue. It's important to every member on this committee. Let me start, if I may. Ms. Titus, almost 2 million more ballots were cast in California's presidential election in 2020 than in 2024. Do you believe the larger turnout in California was due to ballot harvesting efforts?
I'm not sure that the turnout in 2020 being higher than 2024 was the cause of ballot harvesting. I think every cycle, the political parties tend to be the drivers of ballot harvesting. They tend to be the ones that are training the campaigns how to do it because the campaigns sort of change every 2 years. And so the parties are kind of the keepers of the procedures for how to execute ballot harvesting, and I tend to think that they get better at it year after year. So I'm not sure that turnout going down from over a 4-year period is caused by ballot harvesting.
I think it's worth noting, though, that in 2020, there were 2.39 million more mail-in votes than in 2024. That's a huge number. I want to pivot for a second, too, to the curing conversation. Being from Oklahoma, I didn't know what that was. I had no idea what curing actually meant. And again, I think that just brings some uncertainty to the process. And so I want to pivot slightly. You mentioned the signature verification process. Raise of hands here. How many of you use the exact same signature every time or have the exact same signature today that you did a decade ago? Raise your hand. You're the only one, my friend. My point being, I don't understand why we're using signature verification for this process. It's not, I think, it provides the ability for inaccuracies across the board. And I understand that you're taking information from all these different public records to be able to verify those signatures, but I think that in itself is problematic. I don't understand why we wouldn't do a voter ID type of process. The other thing that's been mentioned is that we are allowing for this lengthy process of being able to deliver ballots after Election Day. And again, I think that breeds uncertainty. We want people to have confidence in our elections, and that means timely information. That means a quick turnaround on counting those ballots. So for me, I also think that California should consider actually moving some of these dates up. Why are we not allowing more in-person voting, early in-person voting? It was mentioned there was one day, Saturday, that you can in-person vote. Why not tell people your ballot needs to be in by Election Day, and by the way, we're going to have additional in-person voting days to be able to allow for that. Mr. Gilbert, you mentioned Californians' maintenance, or rather mismaintenance of voter rolls and recommended actions to improve them. How many signatures do we think that California has on file for verification, and how old are they?
Typically, every voter has about 4 to 5 signatures on file. Every time you change something at the DMV or you submit another voter registration when you move, those would be updated and added permanently to your voter file.
Yeah, I think this sort of proves my point that your signature may change over time, and certainly that verification process, I think, becomes much more complicated. As a state that doesn't do signature verification and believes that we do elections like right, I'd like to see that changed. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
The gentlewoman yields back. Representative Sewell is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome all of our witnesses and thank you for your testimony today. I'm a daughter of Selma, Alabama. I grew up there. I have the honor and privilege of representing them in Congress, and there's nothing more important and sacred than the right to vote, in my opinion, and protecting that right, I think, is something that is clearly within our preview here on this committee. I'm a little bit puzzled by our hearing today. I mean, the first premise that is being made is that somehow giving everyone a ballot who is eligible is somehow flawed. I think that we as elected officials should be in the business of making it easier for people to vote, not harder for people to vote. I represent Alabama, and Alabama has same-day voting only. We don't have early voting. We don't have, our absentee ballot process has been restricted. You can't even help your elderly grandmother without helping her to vote. Who has an elderly grandmother who has a stroke victim. You can't help them prepare their ballot because you're for fear of a felony being committed. That's the most recent charge that Alabama has. There are California is one of the largest states in the union, and they have a lot of folks, and they provide eligible voters their vote by mail. And so I don't think that there's something inherently wrong with sending ballots out to every eligible voter. In fact, I would venture to guess that California does have a better return rate and participation rate than states like Alabama that make it harder for folks to vote. And the second reason why we're here today is because somehow getting it getting the results that same night is so critically important. It's more important than making sure that our overseas military personnel who are eligible voters get their ballots back in a timely fashion. I'm not sure what timely is, but I can tell you same-day results does not make it any less prone to fraud or any more prone to fraud. Rather, it allows eligible voters time, especially those that are overseas, an opportunity to cast their ballot. I would venture to guess, Mr. Chairman, that it's more important that we protect that sacred right to vote than to get some result in that same night. So for me, I think that I've been encouraging folks in the state of Alabama to do early voting and to make it easier for folks to vote, not harder for folks to vote. And I'm not really sure why my colleagues don't think that that's right, especially when the Brennan Center says that there's a 0.05% of fraud that occurs during elections, not a rampant fraud from everyone. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Palmer, as one of the directors of, one of the commissioners for the Federal Election Commission, are there best practices that are recommended when it comes to military personnel voting or absentee balloting? Is there sort of one way to do that? And I also would like, I guess the first question that I have for you is it a right for American citizens to have the right to vote when they turn 18? Isn't that a right that every American citizen has? And if so, why is it that so many states like Alabama make it harder for folks to vote rather than easier for folks to vote?
Thank you. The EAC's clearinghouse function sort of takes best practices from across the country, and we share them with each other so states can see how things are working across the country. Our EVE survey is something that our election officials across the country could also view and compare it to other states and similar counties. And I agree with you that coming of age at 18 and being able to register to vote and vote, talking about the opportunities. It may include in-person absentee. It may include in-person early voting, overseas voting.
So there's no, actually, I'm running out of time. So there's no sort of standardized practice that is recommended by the commission?
No, I think we take a best practices look and also the use of technology to make our elections more efficient.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I just want to go on record as saying that the right to vote is a sacred right. It is not a privilege for the few. Somehow my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think that somehow it's a privilege. It is a birthright of every American citizen to be able to vote, and we should be in the business of making it easier to vote, not harder to vote. I'd like to put into the record, unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 items. A letter we sent to you, Mr. Chairman, requesting that the majority be allowed to have it testify by remote access. And secondly, a January 2025 Orange County grand jury report on November 2024 election, which made 3 findings that there was no evidence of fraud in California.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Representative yields back. The representative from Illinois, Ms. Miller, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Palmer, you previously served as the Florida Director of Elections and the Commonwealth of Virginia's Chief Election Official. What is the starkest contrast between how those states collect their ballots and California?
Well, I think that the starkest difference or the contrast is sort of the results early voting and election day plus pre-processed absentees are ready to go on election night. The mail ballot model really and ballot box issue allows those ballots to be returned either by the mail on election day, which will then take 7 to 10 days into the certification period, or a ballot box, which then those ballots still need to be processed. So you already have the results when you're voting in person or early voting or pre-processed absentee with some deadline. Those ballots are ready to go, and those results will be ready to go on election night. If you are waiting to receive mail ballots, you then have to go through the process of signature comparison, processing those ballots, a cure period. So that is why it takes so long in a mail ballot model. It takes longer. Large populations in large counties, you're going to have a large number of issues in getting those ballots tabulated and the results out. And so it just pushes the results later into the period. Hope that helps.
Yes, so what would you say then are procedures or model legislation California should adopt from states that you previously served?
So I believe the pre-processing of absentee or mail ballots is important. Early voting that allows the tabulation of a ballot on site. And then election day, a healthy election day, so you give options to voters. I also think that there should be a deadline for absentee or mail ballots prior to election day, and then they should be returned by election day. That allows voters to know that if they don't have the option to return their ballot by mail or absentee, that they can still vote in person. And so that allows the system to work. We're relying too much on the USPS. The USPS is having major issues. They continue to extend their service dates, and that has a direct impact on elections and voters. You'll find in a lot of mail ballot states that voters do no longer trust the United States Postal Service to get their ballots in on time. So they're going to return it in person or a ballot box. Again, when you return a ballot by mail box, it still's got to go through that entire process of processing as if it was a mail ballot. And so I think that those are some of my recommendations for a state trying to make that process more efficient on the front end.
Thank you. And Mr. Gilbert, can you please expand on how the Voters' Choice Act has complicated ballot counting for election workers by allowing numerous different ballots to be submitted in one voting location?
So when previously you would just go into your precinct and vote, now a vote center has to supply any given ballot to any voter. So for instance, if you live in my area, if you live in Coalinga and you're in Fresno to work and you're at the Fresno Vote Center, they have to provide your ballot for the city of Coalinga. When typically you would have to be nearer to your home. So now that vote center is in charge of sorting that ballot, which is nothing like the Fresno City ballots around it. And also they have to be able to provide conditional voter registrations. So if you have not registered to vote and you would like to vote, you also can register that same day and vote, and those are extremely time consuming.
Are there other election processes that have become more burdensome due to the Voters' Choice Act?
I would say that the number one thing we've seen ever since they started mailing ballots to everyone is California still does mail to P.O. boxes as well, not just physical addresses. If you go into any United States Postal Service towards the P.O. boxes about 30 days before the election, you can find about a couple hundred ballots in the trash can. So I think that's a security concern and one of the things we've seen since the change in procedure.
Thank you, and I yield back, Chairman.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California, Representative Torres, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And let me just start by saying that as the only Californian on this committee, I am outraged. I am simply outraged at the continued attacks from this committee against my home state, Chairman. How dare this committee attack the duly elected members of the state legislature who were elected by Californians to represent them. The fact is, California is doing just fine without your input. Let's look at the facts. California is the 4th largest economy in the world. We send $692 billion to the federal government, and we get $83 billion less in return. Meanwhile, Florida gets $41 billion more, Ohio gets $49 billion more, Texas gets $71 billion more. So do us a favor, and when your state rises to the level of California, Then let's talk about fixing California. So let's now talk about elections. Last year, the chairman and other Republicans, without giving Democrats on this committee a heads up, went to Los Angeles, wasting taxpayers' dollars and time to look for problems. And guess what? They found zero problems. They visited the largest ballot processing center in the nation, responsible for nearly 6 million registered voters. That's bigger than 28 states in the nation. Not a single committee, not a single Republican or political observer contested the outcome of any House race or provided any evidence that California suffered from fraud or any other issues. Why is that? Because California, members, our election infrastructure is sound. We invest in a secured system, rigorous training, and transparency at every level. California has worked hard to ensure that every eligible American voter can cast their vote, and as frustrating as it may be to you and to other people, including myself at times, our fantastic state and local election workers make sure that our elections happen and that they are safe. As a mother of a veteran and a police officer, I know voters might serve far from their home, or they might be a first responder that has to work on election day. Voters can't always take a day off. They might have mobility issues. This is why California established voting by mail, to make it so that every eligible Californian can have their voice heard. California's promise to our voters, whether we like how they vote or not, your voice as a voter is heard. Normally, I would welcome a discussion on improving election operations, but these are not normal times. You see, President Trump and his cronies, like Elon Musk, do not care about the rule of law or the Constitution. They're destroying the economy, attacking and arresting judges, and recently deported 3 American citizens' children, including a 2-year-old toddler and a 4-year-old with stage 4 cancer, a rare cancer. If President Trump and his administration don't care about due process for a child with cancer, how can you honestly sit here and debate and believe that they believe in the Constitution or a free and fair election? Hogwash. They ignore judges when decisions don't go their way. They deny election results when they don't win. Let's be honest, Chairman. Their actions on elections has one goal: to sow distrust in our election system, to suppress the vote, and to make it harder for Americans to participate in our democracy. Not your democracy, our democracy. Do you know what makes people question our elections? It's not California elections. It is the President Trump, Elon Musk, and the Republican Party pushing lies and refusing to follow the law. Meanwhile, Trump's voting order and the Republican SAVE Act will create huge burdens of every American. You've allowed other members to go beyond their time, but you don't like what I'm saying, so you try to shut me down. The SAVE Act is nothing but a bill to try to cancel the vote of people that don't want to vote for you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. All members are reminded to refrain from the use of personalities directed at members of Congress, the President, or the Vice President. All members having used their time for questions, I'd like to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask you to please respond to those questions in writing. Without objection, each member will have 5 legislative days to insert additional material into the record or to revise and extend their remarks. If there's no further business, I want to thank the members for their participation. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.